Hey y'all, my name is Adina Barnett Miller, but I'm known to my students as Mrs. B. I've been passionate about West Virginia history for as long as I can remember, but my mom would tell you it all started when I was 3 years old and she bought me a West Virginia counties puzzle at Gino's Pizza. I've taught history in Ripley, West Virginia for over 20 years now, and I'm an adjunct professor who teaches college West Virginia history to high school students. Please join me for West Virginia History with Mrs. B, a field trip across the Mountain State to walk in the footsteps of those who came before us. Hey y'all, it's West Virginia History with Mrs. B. We are in Peck's Mill, West Virginia in Logan County, and we are at the Forest Lawn Cemetery here in Peck's Mill, and we are standing in front of the Buffalo Creek Memorial that was built in this cemetery, a very large cemetery, to recognize and remember the lives of those who were lost in the Buffalo Creek disaster on February 26, 1972. I want to read a little quote to y'all. It is, "A bridge collapses, an airplane crashes, a coal mine explodes, and a dam fails, and people die. Such are the methods by which tragedy has in recent years traced a pattern of human misery and suffering in West Virginia's history." And this is from the Ad Hoc Commission report that investigated the Buffalo Creek disaster after a coal impoundment dam broke and killed over 100 people here in Logan County. So just to talk about that quotation, as we've talked before, West Virginia has had her, I don't want to say fair share, it's an unfair share of disasters that this state has experienced. And so as that quote alluded to, of course, the bridge that collapsed, that's the Silver Bridge that collapsed in Point Pleasant in 1967. Then the airplane crashes with the entire Marshall football team on the plane, and everyone was lost. Coal mine explodes. That's Farmington in Marion County, which the mine exploded in 1968, and now a dam has failed, and people have died. And this is not going to be the last tragedy in West Virginia where large numbers of people die. Up in Pleasants County at Willow Island, in the 1970s as well, we're going to see a major construction accident happen where the concrete hadn't dried and the structure that they were building collapsed, and it killed over 50 people. Yes, so we're sitting in the car right now, and that's just because the gnats are really, really bad. We are in Peck's Mill in Logan County, and we're at the Forest Lawn Cemetery. And so we are at the Buffalo Creek Memorial, and we want to show that to you, and it is here at the cemetery. So I want to talk a little bit about Buffalo Creek. Buffalo Creek, it was a disaster of epic proportions when a coal impoundment dam broke on February 26, 1972. And people knew that this dam was a problem for years. A resident of Buffalo Creek sent a letter to the governor in 1968 saying, every time it rains, it scares everyone to death. We're afraid we will be washed away and drowned. Please, for God's sakes, have the dump and water destroyed. Our lives are in danger. And the state of West Virginia knew this. It had been, the dam had been investigated and found to be deficient because it was, the emergency spillway was backed up. In 3 days, even before the disaster, the mining company knew that the dam was not safe. And so what ends up happening is on the morning of February 26, 1972, the dam failed, and it caused 132 million gallons of water to careen down the Buffalo Creek Valley, and it traveled in a 20 to 30 foot high flood wave that moved at 7 feet per second. And within 3 hours, the wall of water had traveled 17 miles, and 17 communities were either partially or completely destroyed in the flood. And in total, 118 people were killed. 7 were never found at all. And 1,119 people were physically injured, and over 4,000 people were left homeless. There were 507 homes that were completely destroyed. There were 273 homes that were left with major damage, and there were 43 mobile homes that were destroyed. 10 bridges were destroyed and hundreds of miles of roads and highways. This destruction left behind, it's something that you never recover from. It was of such epic proportions, and the people who survived, the physical and mental and emotional wounds, even over 50 years later, have never been healed. So the monument that we're looking at here in the car was erected by the cemetery, and it lists all the names of all the people that were lost. And there are so many people you can see with the same last names. These are entire families that were destroyed. We're now at what I consider to be probably the most heartbreaking memorial when it comes to the Buffalo Creek disaster. And if you look at this monument here, it says this tiny trio. It's a little baby boy, a little girl, and another little baby boy who their bodies were never claimed by family members, and so we don't know their names. We don't know who they belong to. I personally believe that probably their families were swept away, and that's why we don't know them. But their bodies were recovered, and they were buried here in Forest Lawn Cemetery. And so the monument says, this tiny trio who were victims of the February 26, 1972 Buffalo Creek disaster are unknown to us by name, but to our Heavenly Father they are known as three little angels. And so, you know, personally that can give you a bit of comfort to think of that. But the toll on human life is just unimaginable for the people of Logan County. There's no recovery from something as disastrous as this. So for those of you that would like to come and pay your respects here at Forest Lawn Cemetery, I want to give you a little bit of directions. You're going to get off the Chapmanville exit of Corridor G, and then you're going to take State Route 10 south 4 miles. I think it's about 4.3 miles, and Forest Lawn Cemetery will be on your left. You're going to take the road up the hill. It's going to loop around, and when you get to the front loop up here where that big shrub is, that is where the Buffalo Creek Memorial is. Then you have your 3 crosses here, which you'll see from the main road, and then right here from the 3 crosses is the monument to the 3 little angels that we don't know their names that were lost. This is a very large cemetery. There are a lot of victims from the Buffalo Creek disaster who are buried here, but there was no set point or place for these people to be buried, and so they're buried all over both Logan County and in Domingo County. And you can go on to find a grave, and you can see they have what they call a virtual cemetery, and so you can see the name of each person lost, and you can see where they're buried. So I think that it's important to pay respects to those that we have lost, and so that's why we're here today. So we are now with the Buffalo Creek Disaster Historical Marker. This is at the bridge as you go over to Mahan High School, right there across Buffalo Creek. It's fitting that the sign is here since so many people who survived are going to come to Mahan High School for the basics of necessity, whether it's food or clothing or, you know, just information and medical care. They came to school for everything that they needed. So the sign says Buffalo Creek disaster is one of the worst floods in the United States, and it occurred here on the 26th of February in 1972 when the Buffalo Mining Company impoundment dam for mine waste, it's this slurry. It's like, I don't know how to describe it. If you imagine rocks and coal particles and mud in this water, it just made it thick, like a milkshake. The dam for the mine waste broke. It released over 130 million gallons of black wastewater. Will kill 125. Property losses were over $50 million. And by the way, that's in 1972 money, $50 million. and thousands of people were left homeless. There are going to be 3 separate commissions that put the blame on ignored safety practices of the mining company, and that's not on the sign. And it's going to lead to a federal piece of legislation called the 1973 Dam Control Act. There will be a $13.5 million class action legal settlement in 1974 on behalf of the victims who lost their lives and their family members and everyone that survived. It came out to about $13,800 per person. I mean, it's a joke. But the real joke of it was that the state of West Virginia is going to sue Pittston Coal, and they sue them for $50 million because that's the loss here that the state is putting up, as well as the federal government's putting up money. And 3 days before Governor Archmore left office, he is going to agree to let Pittston Coal off with a $1 million settlement. $50 million in damage, they get $1 million out of Pittston Coal. Eventually, this federal government, because FEMA comes to help, the federal government is going to sue the state of West Virginia for money, and they will win. The federal government wins and gets millions of dollars. I think it's like almost $6 million out of the state of West Virginia, when the state of West Virginia only got back $1 million from Pittston Coal. You're not going to see that on a sign that's produced by state government, of course. But the goal with West Virginia history with Mrs. B is to always to tell the truth. And you know, as I listen to this beautiful creek and I look at the gorgeous water, it just takes my breath away to think about all the lives lost and all the broken dreams and all the broken promises and all of the loss that we have experienced as West Virginians. And this creek and this county they're just markers and reminders of that, of the broken promises that exist and the broken dreams that exist and the heartbreak that exists because we're West Virginians. Hey y'all, we are in Mahan, West Virginia at the Buffalo Creek Memorial. We're actually on the bank of Buffalo Creek at this moment. I'm looking at it as I talk to you and show you things. Just want to imagine that placid little creek that we're looking at now. When the dam broke on the morning of February 26, 1972, a wall of water came careening down this valley that was 20 to 30 feet high. It was 32 million gallons of water that was released into this creek. Thousands of people were impacted. Thousands of people whose lives will never be the same because their friends and family died in something that could have been prevented. The coal impoundment dam was controlled by a company called Pittston Coal. And Pittston Coal, of course, at the beginning decided that they would cooperate with state and federal officials. The state had to act. Archmore was governor at the time. Richard Nixon was president. He signed national disaster relief legislation. In China, he was actually in China at the time, immediately to get national resources here to Buffalo Creek. But Pittston Coal, 3 days after the dam was destroyed, they came out and said it was an act of God and that they weren't liable for what had happened and for all the lives that were destroyed. And I want us to look at those names, at the lives that were destroyed. So many people and so many, families like Donna and Norman Browning. And then you see there's 4 Carters there together. I mean, These are people that were just at home doing their thing when the impoundment broke, and there are people whose bodies were never found. We know of at least 8. They're listed down here. Dorinda Adkins, Samuel Carter, Roscoe Clay, James Davis, Nancy Hobson, Donald McCoy, and Kathy Wall. They never were able to locate their bodies. But if you go back and you watch footage from this time period, it just makes you sick to your stomach to imagine that a company, a coal company, had such disrespect for the people of the community in which they operated. They knew that the dam was deficient. They knew the dam needed fixed. The state of West Virginia said the dam needed fixed, and no one did anything about it. And instead, over 100 people lose their lives. Over 4,000 people are displaced. Thousands of homes are destroyed. And you can't go back. This is one of those events in history, you can't go back to what things were like before this happened. Your community is never the same. When you're missing so many people of your community, you can't come back from that. You try to, but the wounds always remain. And so this is a memorial that was built here in Maine by the people of this area, of this region. All the people who live up Buffalo Creek Road, which we're on right now, all of their kids go to Maine High School. And so it was fitting that the memorial was put here. This is where the waters basically started to subside. Maine High School was the major area for feeding people, connecting people with their family members that they lost or couldn't find. And so we wanted to make this video because even though it's over 50 years later, we don't forget, and we can't forget, because when we forget, things like this happen all over again. And for West Virginia, who has suffered more than her fair share of tragedy, whether it's the Silver Bridge collapsing, or the Marshall plane crash, or, you know, the Farmington mine when it blew up in the late 60s, or, you know, this disaster, or the disaster at Willow Island up in Pleasants County. We have had so much tragedy in our history, and we can't forget it. It's our job as citizens to hold people accountable before things happen, and especially after things happen. And so I hope you've learned a little bit today. I hope that you remember these names, remember these people. These are people who should never be forgotten. Think about baby boy and baby girl and baby boy who were never identified, because more than likely their parents' names are on this wall. And so here they are, buried in Logan County, and nobody even knows their name. Thanks y'all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to West Virginia History with Mrs. B on both Facebook and YouTube.